Napa Valley, September 12th. The sun is setting over the vineyard, casting long, bloody shadows across the rows of pristine white chairs. I am standing in a bridesmaid dress that cost more than my first car, clutching a glass of champagne that tastes like ash. My name is Angela, and 5 minutes ago I discovered my parents sold my life's work to pay for my brother's perfect day. They believe they are watching a wedding. They have no idea they are actually attending the execution of their own reputation. I am not here to catch the bouquet. I am here to light the match. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. The scent of Napa Valley in September is supposed to be earthy, sun-baked soil ripening grapes, a hint of oak. But standing on the manicured lawn of the St. Clair vineyard, all I could smell was money. It was a suffocating floral sweetness that coated the back of my throat, emanating from towering arrangements of imported white orchids that lined the aisle like silent sentinels. I adjusted the strap of my lavender bridesmaid dress, a garment that cost more than my first 3 months of rent in Chicago, and watched the staff scurry. They were polishing crystal flutes, aligning ghost chairs with laser-like precision, and ensuring that every inch of the venue screamed, "Old money." It was a farce, of course. The Pattersons didn't have old money. We didn't even really have new money. We had debt appearances and an obsession with status that was currently threatening to bankrupt my parents for the sake of a 6-hour party. This was my brother Ethan's wedding day. The golden child was finally marrying Sophie, a woman whose entire personality seemed curating by an algorithm for maximum engagement. I stood near the open-air bar, gripping a glass of sparkling water to keep my hands from shaking, though not from nerves. I was just tired. The red-eye flight from New York, the dress fitting where my mother poked at my waistline, and the rehearsal dinner where my father bragged about building empires, it was all wearing thin. Then my phone buzzed against my palm. I almost ignored it. I should have. The ceremony was 40 minutes away, and my mother was already shooting daggers at me from across the lawn for looking antisocial. But the vibration pattern was specific. It wasn't a text. It was a high-priority alert from my personal server. I shielded the screen from the harsh California glare. Subject: notice of asset transfer finalized. Patterson Technologies, LLC. The world didn't stop, but the sound seemed to get sucked out of the air. The clinking glasses, the string quartet warming up the laughter of the groomsmen, it all turned into static. I stared at the notification, my thumb hovering over the open button. Transfer finalized. That wasn't possible. Patterson Technologies, LLC was the original entity, the dusty little incubator I'd started in college. It held some legacy IP, sure, but it was dormant. Or it should have been. I opened the attachment. It was a bill of sale. A transfer of 100% ownership to a holding company I didn't recognize, authorized by the majority stakeholders. I scrolled to the bottom, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. There, in digital ink, were the signatures. Mark Patterson, Elaine Patterson. My breath hitched. They had done it. They had actually done it. My parents had ambushed me on the morning of my brother's wedding by selling the only thing I had ever built with my own hands, likely to pay for the vintage champagne chilling in those silver buckets. I looked up. Across the lawn, my father was clapping Ethan on the shoulder, laughing at something, looking for all the world like a benevolent patriarch. My mother was fussing with Sophie's veil. They looked perfect. They looked happy. They had no idea that I was reading the receipt for my own soul. To understand why a simple business sale felt like a physical disembowelment, you have to understand where we came from. We grew up in a mid-sized town just outside of Dallas, the kind of place where high school football stars are treated like war heroes, and family values is a phrase usually followed by a request for a loan. My father, Mark, was a blue-collar guy who had hustled his way into owning a chain of HVAC repair shops. He was obsessed with respectability. He wanted the biggest truck, the greenest lawn, and the most envy from the neighbors. My mother, Elaine, was his co-conspirator. She was a church-going woman who treated Sunday service like a fashion runway and motherhood like a PR campaign. And the centerpiece of that campaign was Ethan. Ethan, my older brother by 2 years, was the sun around which the Patterson universe orbited. He was the varsity quarterback, the prom king, the charming boy who smiled his way out of speeding tickets and failing grades. If Ethan needed new cleats, the money appeared. If Ethan crashed his car, it was an accident, and a new one was in the driveway a week later. Then there was me, Angela, the quiet one, the difficult one. I was introverted, bookish, and possessed a mind that liked to take things apart to see how they worked. In a family that valued volume and visibility, I was a ghost. I was the one doing the dishes while everyone watched Ethan recount his touchdown pass. I was the one tutoring Ethan so he wouldn't get kicked off the team. The dynamic was subtle, but crushing. My parents preached family first, constantly. "We do things together, Angela." My mother would scold when I wanted to stay in my room and read. "Don't embarrass us by being antisocial." But family first always seemed to mean Ethan first. My role was to be the support beams for his stage. They used the concept of community as a weapon to control me. "We sacrificed so much for you," my dad would say, whenever I asked for something for myself, like a computer camp or a trip with friends. "The least you can do is support your brother." By the time I hit college, I had learned the lesson well. If I wanted something, I had to get it myself, and I had to keep it hidden. I went to a state university on a partial scholarship and worked 2 jobs. But in the margins of my life, between shifts at the library and classes, I started building something. It was 2016 and the gig economy was exploding. I saw a gap in how small businesses handled local logistics. I coded a piece of software, a rough, ugly little app, that helped mom-and-pop shops route their deliveries more efficiently than the big guys. I called it Patterson Technologies. I was proud of the name. I thought stupidly that it might make my father proud too. But I needed capital. Not much, just $5,000 for server space and a proper business license to bid on a municipal contract. I had no credit history, no collateral. I had to ask them. I remember the conversation vividly. It was Thanksgiving break. I sat at the kitchen table, my business plan in a neat binder, charts and projections color-coded. My father didn't even open it. "You want a loan?" He laughed, chewing on a toothpick. "Angie, honey, you're studying English. What do you know about logistics?" "I'm studying computer science, Dad." I corrected him, though I knew he didn't care. "And it's a loan. I'll pay it back with interest." "We're a little tight right now," my mom said, washing dishes. "Ethan's grad school applications are expensive." "Ethan never went to grad school. He went to Cancun." "Please," I said. "I just need a co-signer. You don't even have to put up the cash. Just sign so the bank trusts me." My father sighed, the weight of the world apparently on his shoulders. "Fine, but we're doing this properly. If I'm putting my name on it, I want control, just in case you flake out and I have to clean up the mess." He slid a stack of papers across the table. They weren't just bank forms. He had downloaded a generic family partnership agreement and a power of attorney. "It's just for the business," he said, tapping the signature line. "Standard stuff. It lets us handle the paperwork if you get overwhelmed with school." I hesitated. My gut told me to run. But I was 19 and I was desperate to prove I could be something other than Ethan's sister. I wanted them to see me, so I sacrificed my instincts for their approval. I signed. "Good girl," my dad said, snatching the papers back. "Now go help your mother." That was the seed of the betrayal. They watered it for years. My little side project didn't fail. It thrived. I spent my 20s grinding. While Ethan was floating through entry-level sales jobs and asking my parents for rent money, I was in Chicago sleeping 4 hours a night, building Patterson Technologies from a dorm room app into a legitimate logistics platform. But I never told them. I saw how they treated money. I saw how they treated me. If they knew I was making real money, they would have guilted me into funding Ethan's lifestyle. They would have claimed my success was family property. So I created a double life. When the company started scaling, I formed a new entity, Vance Global, using my middle name. I transferred the active operations, the client lists, and the revenue streams into the new corporation. I buried my identity behind layers of trusts and holding companies. By the time I was 27, I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech firm. My software-powered delivery fleets across the Midwest. I had a loft in the city, a driver, and a portfolio of investments. To my parents, I was still Angie, the struggling tech support worker who lived in a cramped apartment and couldn't afford to come home for Christmas. I let them believe I was a disappointment. It was the only way to be free. "It's a shame you burned out, honey," my mom would say on the phone, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "You were always so high-strung. Maybe you should move back here. Ethan's friend is looking for a receptionist." "I'm fine, Mom," I'd say, staring out the window of my corner office at the Chicago skyline. "I'm getting by." I thought I was smart. I thought I had outmaneuvered them. I left the original Patterson Technologies LLC, active, but hollow, a shell company with my name and theirs on it, just to keep up appearances. I figured it was harmless. I was wrong. The inciting incident came 6 months ago with the announcement. "Ethan found the one," my mom had shrieked into the phone. "Her name is Sophie. She's very spirited. She has a vision for the wedding." The vision, it turned out, cost about $300,000. The calls started coming weekly, subtly at first, then more aggressively. "We want this to be a legacy event," my dad said. "Something that shows people who the Pattersons are. But the market is down, Angie. We're a little liquid poor at the moment." "I wish I could help," I said, sticking to the script. "But rent went up again." "Right," he said, his tone turning dismissive. "Well, we'll figure it out. We might have to make some hard choices. Shake the couch cushions, you know." I thought shaking the couch cushions meant selling the RV or downgrading the venue. I didn't realize the couch cushions was code for Angie's past. And now here I was, the day of the wedding. I stared at the PDF on my phone again. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. They must have gone digging. Maybe they found an old bank statement, or maybe my dad just remembered he still had power of attorney over that old LLC. They probably thought they were being clever, liquidating a failed business to pay for their golden boy's big day. They had sold Patterson Technologies LLC. The email confirmed the transfer price, $120,000. They sold my birthright for a fraction of what it was worth just to pay for a venue rental and a custom tuxedo. They had forged updated operating agreements, used the old POA to bypass my current consent, and cashed me out. To them, it was free money. They thought they had scavenged a carcass. But the emotion hitting me wasn't just financial loss. It was the total erasure of my personhood. They didn't see a business I built. They seen a piggy bank to be smashed open for Ethan. They had looked at the years I spent coding until my eyes bled the risks. I took the life I built, and they decided it was all worth less than one day of glory for my brother. I looked at the timestamps. They had closed the deal 3 days ago. They had been smiling at me during the rehearsal dinner, pouring wine, hugging me, all while knowing they had just stolen from me. The betrayal was so absolute, so threatening to my sense of self, that for a moment I wanted to walk onto that altar and scream until my throat tore. I wanted to burn the white chairs and the orchids. But then a cold calm settled over me. Internal monologue shifted. They think I'm helpless. They think I'm the struggling daughter who will cry and then forgive them because family is everything. I looked at the notification again. Transfer complete. They didn't know who I really was. They didn't know that Angie the receptionist was a mask. And they certainly didn't know that by activating that old LLC and selling it, they hadn't just sold a business. They had walked into a legal minefield that I had the map for. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my clutch. The organ music swelled. The ceremony was starting. I took my place in the line of bridesmaids. I forced a smile onto my face, a ceramic mask to match the perfect white chairs. I would walk down that aisle. I would pose for the photos. I would let them have their perfect ceremony. But inside, I was already drafting the response. They wanted to use my past to pay for this wedding fine. I would make sure the bill came due before the cake was cut. The ceremony ended with a crescendo of violins and a polite ripple of applause. As the guests began to migrate toward the cocktail terrace following the scent of truffle oil and expensive perfume, I slipped away. My face was a mask of practiced neutrality, the same expression I wore during hostile board takeovers, but beneath the lavender silk of my bridesmaid dress, my skin felt like it was vibrating. I found refuge in the venue's bridal suite, which was currently empty. The room was a chaos of hairspray fumes, discarded tissues, and empty mimosa glasses, the debris of a perfect morning. I locked the door, leaned against the heavy oak wood, and let the silence wash over me for a grand total of 3 seconds. Then the rage hit. It wasn't a hot, screaming anger. It was a cold, suffocating pressure. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. I saw the dutiful daughter, the one who had flown halfway across the country, worn the dress, bought the gift, and smiled while my parents gutted my history to fund a party. I remembered every lecture my father had ever given me about the American dream. You pull yourself up, Angie. You don't ask for handouts. You build your own castle. I had built my castle, stone by stone, and they had just tried to sell the foundation out from under me. I wanted to march out there and flip the table where the gifts were stacked. I wanted to grab the microphone and scream until my voice gave out. But then I remembered the other lesson they had inadvertently taught me. Don't let them see you bleed. If I reacted with emotion, I was just the hysterical daughter. I was the dramatic sister ruining Ethan's day. They would spin it. They would make me the villain. No, I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't scream. I would act. I pulled out my phone and dialed Rachel, my in-house counsel, and arguably the most terrifying woman in Chicago. I got the alert, Rachel said. No hello, no pleasantries. She knew where I was. Are you somewhere secure? I'm in the bridal suite, I said, my voice sounding frighteningly calm. Tell me exactly what happened. It's a mess, Angela. But it's a mess we anticipated. Rachel's voice was crisp, the sound of flipping pages in the background. Your parents executed the sale of Patterson Ventures LLC this morning. They used a notarized affidavit claiming you were incapacitated and unable to manage the asset, activating their dormant power of attorney. They pushed the sale through to a buyer called Red Oak Holdings. How much? $120,000. A quick cash buyout. It's significantly under market value even for a shell, but they clearly needed the liquidity fast, probably to pay the final vendor bills for today. I closed my eyes. They claimed I was incapacitated, mentally unfit to manage financial affairs due to stress, Rachel quoted. That's the language on the affidavit. They forged a doctor's note, Angela. I'm looking at the signature. Dr. Henderson. Isn't that your childhood pediatrician who retired 5 years ago? A bitter laugh escaped my throat. Yeah, that's him. Here is the good news, Rachel continued, her voice dropping an octave. They walked right into the wood chipper. Remember the restructuring we did 8 months ago when you were worried about loose ends? I remember. You created Red Oak Holdings. It's a blind subsidiary of Vance Global. We set it up to quietly acquire any loose IP related to your early work so we could clean up the patent trail. The realization hit me like a physical blow, followed immediately by a rush of adrenaline. So, I started, my grip tightening on the phone. So, Rachel finished, your parents didn't sell your business to a stranger. They sold your business to you. They committed fraud, forgery, and securities violations to sell an asset you already own back to a company you control. They stole from me to sell to me, I whispered. It was almost poetic in its stupidity. Legally, we have them on a spit, Angela. But it gets worse. I had Marcus run a full forensic audit on your personal identifiers once the sale triggered the fraud alert. We dug into everything connected to your SSN. Tell me. It's not just the business. We found 3 credit cards opened in your name in the last 4 years, maxed out. We found a truck loan for a Ford F-150 co-signed by Angela Patterson 2 years ago. Ethan's truck, I said. The room seemed to tilt. They told me they bought that for him as a graduation gift. They bought it with your credit score. And they've been missing payments. Your credit is taking the hits, not theirs. And Angela, they claimed you as a dependent on their taxes for the last 3 years. They're claiming your incapacity allows them to manage your finances. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, the expensive dress pooling around me. This wasn't just a desperate grab for wedding cash. This was a long-term systemic pattern of erasing my autonomy. They were harvesting me. To them, I wasn't a person. I was a resource, a crop to be farmed whenever Ethan needed fertilizer for his life. I thought back to the years of guilt trips. Flashback. 4 years ago, I was visiting for Christmas. I had just bought my first decent apartment in the city. I was proud. I showed my mom photos on my phone. Must be nice, she had sniffed, turning back to the stove. Your brother is struggling to pay for his books, and you're buying granite countertops. We're family, Angela. You'll understand when you have kids. You sacrifice for the ones who need it. I had felt so guilty that I wrote them a check for $2,000 for the house. They must have laughed all the way to the bank, knowing they already had a credit card in my wallet's name. Flashback. 2 years ago, Ethan's DUI. My dad called me at 3 a.m. We need bail money, Angie. We can't let this ruin his record. He has a future. I don't have $5,000 cash, Dad, I'd said. Figure it out, he'd screamed. What is wrong with you? Do you want your brother in a cage? I had drained my emergency fund. I ate ramen for a month. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't hard times. It was predation. If I did nothing today, if I let this wedding end with toasts and cheers, they would do this forever. They would do it to my future children. They would leverage my name until I was buried under their debt. Angela. Rachel's voice snapped me back to the bridal suite. We have enough to go to the FBI. We have enough to bury them. What do you want to do? I stood up. I walked back to the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the scared girl who signed those papers at 19. She was the CEO of a multinational corporation. She was a shark, and she smelled blood. I want the package, I said. Send everything to my secure cloud. The forged signatures, the Red Oak transfer, the credit card statements, the truck loan. All of it. And the authorities? Call them, I said. Call the local fraud unit. Tell them the suspects are at the St. Clair Vineyard. Tell them there's a flight risk involving international assets. Make sure they come to the back entrance. I don't want them interrupting the dinner. I want them waiting for dessert. Understood. And Angela Marcus found one more thing. The investors your dad bragged about getting for his HVAC expansion last year. They're locals, church friends. He took their money and funneled it into the wedding account. It's a Ponzi scheme, Ong. If we blow this up, we're not just saving you, we're saving half the town. Do it. I hung up. My hands were steady now. I needed to talk to someone who wasn't on my payroll. I scrolled to Jasmine's contact. Jasmine was my first hire, my best friend, and the only person who knew exactly how toxic my family was. She answered on the first ring. I'm watching the live stream your cousin posted. The flowers are gorgeous. I hate them. They sold the company, I said. And they stole my identity for Ethan's truck. Silence on the line. Then a low, dangerous sound. I'm flying out there. I will bring a tire iron. No need, I have Rachel. The police are coming. Good, Jasmine said. Burn it down, Aang. Jasmine, am I a monster? The question slipped out before I could stop it. It's his wedding day. If I do this, there's no coming back. I'm nuking the family. They nuked the family when they decided you were spare parts, Jasmine said, her voice fierce. Listen to me. What does winning look like? Do you want them dead? Broke? I want them stopped. I said the words tasting like iron. I want the truth on the table. I'm tired of being the secret they keep in the dark so they can shine. I want my name back. Then take it, she said. But be surgically precise. Don't make a scene. Make a statement. I hung up. A statement. I checked the time. The reception dinner was starting in 20 minutes. The speeches were scheduled for after the entree. I had exactly enough time. I unlocked the door and slipped out, heading not toward the party, but toward the AV booth set up in the back of the reception tent. The tension had been building for days looking back on it. I should have seen the signs at the rehearsal dinner last night. We were at a fancy Italian place downtown. My parents were holding court at the head table, flushed with wine and self-importance. I was seated at the far end next to a cousin I hadn't seen in a decade. My father stood up to give a toast. He raised his glass, the light catching the gold Rolex on his wrist, a Rolex I now knew was likely bought with my credit. "To Ethan," he boomed, "a man who knows the value of hard work, and to us, the parents. You know, people ask how we pulled off a wedding like this in this economy." He chuckled, a wet, self-satisfied sound. "It's about sacrifice. It's about being smart with your assets. We Patterson men, we build legacies." He looked right at me when he said assets. A challenge. A warning. We own you. Later that night, I had cornered Ethan at the bar. He was already 3 whiskeys deep, his face flushed. "Quite a show Dad's putting on," I said, swirling my soda. "He's just happy, Angie," Ethan slurred slightly. "Don't be a downer." "It's a lot of money, Ethan. Where did they get it? Dad's business has been flat for years." Ethan shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "They moved some stuff around, sold off some dead weight." "Dead weight? You know," he waved a hand vaguely, "that old LLC of yours. Mom said you weren't really using it. Said it was just sitting there costing fees." I froze. "You knew?" He looked at me then, and I saw it, the flash of guilt quickly covered by entitlement. "Look, Aang, you're doing fine in the city. You always land on your feet. Sophie really wanted this venue. We're family. You help out. That's what we do." "I didn't offer to help out, Ethan. I didn't sign anything." "Come on," he scoffed, turning away to high-five a groomsman. "Don't make this about you. Just let us have this one day." That was the moment. That was the moment I realized he wasn't innocent. He wasn't just a clueless beneficiary. He was an accomplice. He knew they had cannibalized my property, and his only reaction was annoyance that I might complain about it. Back in the present, I reached the AV booth. A young guy with a headset was scrolling through TikTok on his phone. "Hey," I said, flashing my most dazzling, harmless smile. "I'm the groom's sister. I have the updated file for the family tribute slideshow." He looked up, bored. "They already gave me a USB drive." "Oh, I know," I said, leaning in conspiratorially. "But Mom wanted to add a few baby pictures she found last minute. You know how moms are. She'd kill me if I didn't get this in." I held out a sleek black flash drive. It contained the original slideshow photos, perfectly preserved. But starting at slide 12, right after the photo of Ethan in his Pee-wee football uniform, I had inserted the screenshots Rachel sent me. The loan documents, the forged affidavit, the red oak bill of sale. The tech guy shrugged and took the drive. "Whatever, as long as it plays." "It plays," I promised. "It's going to be very moving." I watched him plug it in. I watched him drag the file to the playlist. "Set to cue after the maid of honor speech," he asked. "Perfect," I said. I walked away, my heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The trap was set. The police were en route. The evidence was loaded. I went back to the hotel room I had booked for the day, used just to freshen up, I had told them. I needed 5 minutes alone before the curtain went up. I walked to the desk near the window overlooking the vineyard. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the vines. On the desk sat 2 envelopes I had prepared the night before. This was my ritual. I always gave myself an out. Envelope 1 was thin. Inside was a resignation letter from the family. A simple note saying I was cutting contact, changing my number, and disappearing. It was the peace option. I could get in a car right now, drive to San Francisco, and fly home. I could let them have their fraud. I could write off the loss as the cost of freedom. Envelope 2 was thick. It contained the hard copies of the evidence I had already given to Rachel, plus a prepared statement for the press, in case my parents tried to spin this publicly. This was the truth option. I looked at the thin envelope. It was tempting. It was safe. It was what a good daughter would do, suffer in silence to preserve the peace. Then I looked at the window. I saw the guests filtering into the reception tent. I saw my father slapping backs playing the big man. I saw my mother preening. If I walked away, they won. If I walked away, they would find another victim. Maybe Ethan's new wife. Maybe their neighbors. I picked up the thin envelope and tore it in half. Then I tore it again and again until it was confetti. I dropped the pieces into the trash can. I picked up my clutch and the thick envelope. I checked my reflection one last time. I applied a fresh coat of lipstick, a shade called Power Red. "Showtime," I whispered. I walked out of the room and headed toward the reception tent. The air was cooling, but inside the tent things were about to get very, very hot. The reception was in full swing when I entered. The tent was a masterpiece of draped silk and fairy lights. A live band was playing soft jazz. Waiters were circling with trays of bacon-wrapped scallops. I found my seat at the head table. My mother smiled at me, a tight, warning smile. "Where have you been?" she hissed under her breath. People were asking. "Just fixing my makeup, Mom," I said, taking my seat. "I wanted to look perfect for the video." "Good," she said, patting my hand. "Just smile and don't drink too much. We don't want you getting sloppy." "Don't worry," I said, unfolding my napkin. "I'm stone cold sober." I looked out at the sea of faces, 200 guests, family friends, business associates, Sophie's influencer crowd, all of them believing the lie, all of them admiring the Patterson success story. My phone buzzed in my lap, a text from Rachel. "Units are in position. They are holding at the perimeter until your signal. Good luck." I took a sip of water. The MC, a cheesy guy in a sparkly jacket, tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "please take your seats. Dinner is served. And while you enjoy your salads, we have a very special presentation, a tribute to the happy couple prepared by the family." The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room. My father leaned back in his chair, looking smug. Ethan grabbed Sophie's hand, looking adoringly at the screen. I sat very still. I watched the projector beam cut through the darkness. The music started a sappy, sentimental ballad. The first slide came up Ethan as a baby naked on a bearskin rug. "Ah," the crowd cooed. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. Slide 2. Ethan and me playing in the sprinklers. Slide 3. The family at Disney World. My mother dabbed her eyes. "Oh, look at us," she whispered. "We were so happy." "Yes," I said softly. "We were." I kept counting. We were at slide 10. 2 more to go before the world ended. I looked at Ethan. He was laughing at a picture of his bad high school haircut. He looked so carefree. He had no idea that the sister sitting 3 feet away from him was about to light a match that would burn his entire reality to ash. Slide 11. Ethan's high school graduation. I took a deep breath. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching a movie. Slide 12 clicked into place. The music didn't stop. The sentimental ballad kept playing. But the image on the screen wasn't a baby photo. It was a high-resolution scan of a notarized affidavit. Subject: incapacity of Angela Patterson. Signed, Mark Patterson. There was a beat of confusion. The ahs stopped. A ripple of murmuring started in the back. "What is that?" Sophie asked, squinting at the screen. "Must be a glitch," my dad said, half rising. "Hey, tech guy, wrong slide." But the slide didn't change, or rather it did. Slide 13, bill of sale, Patterson Ventures. Price $120,000. Slide 14. Credit card statement, account holder, Angela Patterson. Status, past due. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the sappy music singing about endless love. My father was standing now, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Cut it. Cut the feed. I stood up. I didn't need a microphone. The acoustics in the tent were perfect and the silence was absolute. It's not a glitch, Dad, I said, my voice cutting through the dark. Every head turned toward me. Sit down, Angela, my mother hissed, her eyes wide with panic. What are you doing? You're embarrassing us. No, Mom, I said, stepping away from the table so everyone could see me. You embarrassed yourselves. You just thought no one was watching. I looked at the tech guy and gave a small nod. He killed the music. Most of you know me as the quiet sister, I said to the room. The one who moved away. What you don't know is that for the last 10 years I've been the bank account that funded the lie you're all celebrating. I pointed at the screen where a new image had appeared, a side-by-side comparison of the wedding budget and the wire transfer from the stolen business sale. My parents forged my signature, I said, my voice steady, projecting to the back of the room. They stole my identity, and they sold my company to pay for these flowers. She's lying, my father shouted, desperate now. She's sick. She's having a breakdown. I'm not sick, I said. And I'm not broke, and I'm definitely not helpless anymore. I looked toward the back entrance of the tent. Rachel now. The flaps of the tent opened. The silence that followed the opening of the tent flaps was heavy, thick enough to choke on. It wasn't the respectful silence of a church service. It was the paralyzed silence of a car crash in progress. 3 people walked through the entrance. They weren't wearing uniforms, but they didn't need to. They wore the nondescript, ill-fitting suits of federal employees who aren't paid to be fashionable, but to be thorough. One of them, a woman with a severe bob and a badge clipped to her belt, scanned the room until her eyes locked on the head table. My father, Mark, was still standing, his napkin clutched in a fist that was trembling visibly. Who are these people? He demanded, his voice cracking. This is a private event, security. There is no security, Dad, I said into the dead air. Because I'm paying for the security and I told them to take a break. I turned back to the crowd. The guests were frozen. Forks were halfway to mouths. A few phones were already raised, glowing like fireflies in the dim light, recording the disaster. This was the moment. The ceremony had been picture perfect, the vows about loyalty, the unity candle, the pastor droning on about the sanctity of trust. It was all a beautiful hollow shell. Now we were cracking it open to show the rot inside. I pressed the clicker in my hand. The slide on the screen changed. The image of the stolen loan documents and the forged affidavit shrank to the corner, replaced by a complex corporate flowchart. It looked boring at first glance, boxes, arrows, percentages. But to anyone who knew business, it was a map of a slaughter. I know this looks complicated, I said, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with the panic rising from the head table. So let me simplify it. My parents, Mark and Elaine, needed money to pay for this wedding. They wanted to impress you. They wanted you to think the Patterson legacy was thriving. But they didn't have the cash. So they looked at their assets. They sold a boat, They mortgaged their house, They looked at me. Angela, stop this! My mother shrieked. It was a raw, ugly sound that made the guests flinch. You are ruining your brother's life. You ruined it when you funded it with fraud. I shot back, not even looking at her. I kept my eyes on the audience. They found an old business I started in college, Patterson Ventures. They used a power of attorney I signed when I was 19, a document that was only supposed to be for emergencies, and they declared me mentally incompetent to seize control. I clicked again. The screen zoomed in on the medical signature. Dr. Henderson, I read aloud. A pediatrician. A man who hasn't treated me since I had chickenpox. They forged his signature to declare me unfit so they could sell my company. A gasp rippled through the room. I saw the faces of my parents' friends, church deacons, neighbors, business partners. They looked horrified. Not at me, but at the people they had been toasting 5 minutes ago. But here is where things get interesting, I said, leaning against the table, channeling every ounce of cold corporate fury I had honed in boardrooms. They sold Patterson Ventures to a holding company called Red Oak. They got a quick payout. They thought they were robbing a piggy bank. I paused. The federal agents were moving closer, navigating through the maze of tables, but they held back, letting me finish. They knew the value of a confession in front of 200 witnesses. What they didn't know, I continued, is that Patterson Ventures holds the founding intellectual property for a supply chain algorithm used by 40% of the logistics market in the Midwest. It wasn't a dead asset. It was a dormant volcano. My father was pale now, sweat beading on his forehead. It was a worthless little app, he sputtered, trying to address the guests. She's inflating it. It was just a hobby. A hobby? I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Let's see. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen went black for a heartbeat. Then a video began to play. It was a clip from CNBC dated 3 months ago. The anchor was speaking excitedly about the future of logistics. The mysterious rise of Vance Global has baffled analysts, the TV anchor said. Under the leadership of its reclusive CEO, J.P. Vance, the company has acquired nearly half the regional market share. The video cut to a still image, a corporate headshot. A woman in a sharp navy blazer, arms crossed, staring down the camera with eyes of steel. It was me. That's CEO, I said, pointing to the giant face on the screen. That's me, J.P. Vance. My middle name is Jane. My mother's maiden name is Vance. The room erupted. It wasn't just murmurs anymore. It was a roar of shock. Chairs scraped as people turned to look at me. Really look at me for the first time. They didn't see the shy, lavender-clad bridesmaid anymore. They saw a titan. And Red Oak Holdings? I asked, my voice cutting through the noise. The company you sold my business to, that's a wholly owned subsidiary of Vance Global. You didn't sell my business to a stranger, Dad. You sold my business to me. My father collapsed into his chair. He understood the math instantly. He hadn't just stolen. He had stolen from the very person he was trying to defraud, completing a circle of stupidity so perfect it was almost geometric. You committed wire fraud, identity theft, and securities fraud to sell me my own property, I said. And because Red Oak is a corporate entity, you didn't just steal from your daughter. You stole from my shareholders. You triggered a federal investigation. I turned to the agents. They're all yours. The woman with the badge stepped forward. She didn't draw a weapon. This wasn't a violent crime, but the violence of the moment was palpable. She walked up to the head table, flanked by her partners. Mark Patterson, Elaine Patterson. She said, her voice carrying the flat, bored tone of bureaucracy doing its job. We are with the Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Division. We have warrants for your arrest and the immediate freezing of all assets connected to the wedding accounts. Arrest. My mother stood up, knocking over her wine glass. Red Pinot Noir bled across the pristine white tablecloth, dripping onto her expensive gown. You can't arrest us. We're the parents of the groom. This is a wedding. Ma'am, please step away from the table, the agent said, producing a pair of handcuffs. The reality shattered the room. My mother began to wail, a high, keening sound of pure victimization. We did it for the family. We only wanted to help Angela. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. She reached for me across the table, her hands grasping. I took a step back. It's not a misunderstanding, Mom, I said quietly. It's a transaction. You taught me that. Everything is a transaction. My father tried to muster some dignity. He stood up, straightening his jacket, but his eyes were darting around the room looking for an ally. He found none. The guests were recoiling. The people he had spent a lifetime trying to impress were looking at him like he was radioactive. You ungrateful little bitch, he hissed at me as the agent turned him around. We gave you life. We put a roof over your head. And then you sold my future to pay for a party, I said. Now the party is over. As they were led away, the silence broke. The room devolved into chaos. Waiters stopped serving. The band looked at each other confused, and the drummer awkwardly hit a cymbal. But I wasn't done. There was one person left. Ethan. He was sitting at the center of the head table looking like a child who had dropped his ice cream cone. His face was a mixture of confusion and petulance. He wasn't looking at our parents being marched out the side exit. He was looking at me. "You ruined my wedding," he said. It was a flat statement. No concern for the felony charges. No shock about the theft. Just the selfish observation of a golden child who had finally been told no. Sophie, his bride, was sobbing into her hands, her mascara running in black streaks. She looked up at Ethan, waiting for him to do something to fix it, to be the man he pretended to be. Ethan stood up and slammed his hands on the table. "Fix this. Angela, call them back. Tell them it was a mistake. I can't believe you would do this to me." "To you?" I laughed, and it felt like a release. "Ethan, look around. Who paid for this champagne? Who paid for that dress? Who paid for the truck you drove here?" "Mom and Dad did." "I did," I shouted, finally letting the volume rise. "My credit, my identity, my company. I have been subsidizing your life since you were 20 years old. You're not a success story, Ethan. You're a dependent." He flinched as if I had slapped him. "That's not true. I work hard. You work at a job. Dad got you driving a truck I paid for, living in a condo they co-signed, using my social security number." I said, listing the facts like bullet points on a slide. "You wanted to be the king of this family. You wanted the legacy. Well, congratulations. The legacy is fraud, and you're the heir." "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear, Aang, I didn't know." "You knew enough," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You knew about the business sale. You told me last night. You knew they were stripping me for parts, and you didn't care as long as the checks cleared." I looked at Sophie. She had stopped crying. She was looking at Ethan with a dawning realization. She was realizing that the man she married wasn't a provider. He was a parasite. "Sophie," I said, "I'm sorry about your day. I really am. But you should probably check your credit score tomorrow. If they used mine, they probably used yours too." Sophie's eyes went wide. She turned to Ethan. "Did they?" Ethan stammered. I don't know. Mom handles the paperwork." That was the nail in the coffin. Mom handles the paperwork. The mantra of a 30-year-old boy. I turned away from them. The guests were parting like the Red Sea as I walked toward the exit. I could feel their eyes on me. Judgment, awe, fear. I didn't care. "Wait!" Ethan yelled after me. "Where are you going? You can't just leave. Who's going to pay for the rest of this?" I stopped at the edge of the dance floor. I turned back one last time. "You are," I said. "Welcome to the real world, big brother." I walked out of the tent and into the cool night air. Behind me, the sound of the reception disintegrating was louder than any applause. I could hear arguments breaking out. I heard the venue manager shouting about the bill. I heard Sophie screaming at Ethan. I walked to the parking lot where a black sedan was waiting. Not a rental, my car. My driver, a man named Davis, who had been with me for 3 years, opened the door. "Everything go according to plan, Ms. Vance?" he asked, ignoring the chaos erupting from the venue behind us. "Yes, Davis," I said, sliding into the leather seat. "It went exactly according to plan." I looked back at the glowing tent one last time. It looked like a lantern in the darkness. Inside, everything I had ever known, my family, my history, my childhood obligations, was burning to the ground. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one holding the fire extinguisher. I was the one holding the match. "Where to?" Davis asked. "The airport," I said. "I have a board meeting in Chicago on Monday." And Davis, "Ma'am, play something upbeat." As the car pulled away, leaving the vineyard and the wreckage of the Patterson legacy behind, I leaned my head back against the seat. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank. "Fraud alert resolved." I closed my eyes and finally truly smiled. The wedding was over, but my life was just beginning. The immediate aftermath of a wedding disaster isn't loud, it's uncomfortably, excruciatingly quiet. As the federal agents escorted my parents into unmarked sedans, no sirens, just the flashing hazard lights cutting through the vineyard dusk, the guests didn't scream. They scattered. It was like watching cockroaches when the kitchen light snaps on. People who had spent the last 4 hours drinking my father's champagne and laughing at his jokes were suddenly sprinting for the valet stand, desperate to disassociate. No one wanted to be interviewed as a witness. No one wanted to be in the background of the inevitable viral video. I didn't leave immediately. I stood by my car watching the dissolution of the social climbing my parents had dedicated their lives to. I saw Sophie, still in her massive, frothy wedding dress, standing by the entrance of the reception tent. She looked like a collapsed meringue. Ethan was trying to talk to her, his hands waving in frantic, pleading gestures. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the body language. He reached for her arm. She recoiled. Sophie didn't look sad. She looked like someone who had just realized she bought a counterfeit purse. She turned on her heel, gathered up her train, and walked toward the parking lot alone. She climbed into her maid of honor's SUV and slammed the door. They peeled out of the gravel lot, leaving Ethan standing there in his rented tuxedo, a king without a kingdom. The destruction was total. I spent the next 3 days at a hotel in the next town over, turning it into a temporary command center. The adrenaline of the reveal had faded, replaced by the grim administrative work of an executioner cleaning the guillotine. The reaction in our hometown was swift and brutal. In small towns, reputation is currency, and the Pattersons had just declared bankruptcy. The story broke on the local news the next morning, fueled by the cell phone footage from the wedding. Local business owner arrested for fraud at son's wedding. It was sensational. It was humiliating. When I drove into town on Tuesday to meet with the local prosecutor, the atmosphere had shifted. For years I had walked these streets as the invisible daughter, the one people looked through. Now heads turned. I stopped at the coffee shop my mother used to hold court in. The silence that fell when I opened the door was heavy. Then Mrs. Higgins, the church choir director, and one of my mother's fiercest loyalists stood up. I braced myself for a lecture on honoring thy father and mother. Instead, she walked over and put a hand on my arm. "We didn't know Angela," she said quietly. "Mark borrowed $5,000 from my husband last year for inventory expansion. We never saw a dime back. We thought we were the only ones." That broke the dam. Others came forward. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just the banks. My parents had been running a social Ponzi scheme, borrowing goodwill and cash from friends and neighbors to keep up the facade of the perfect family. By exposing them, I hadn't just taken revenge, I had validated half the town's suspicions. I wasn't the villain who ruined a wedding. I was the whistleblower who popped the blister. But vindication doesn't pay the bills for the innocent. I sat down with Rachel and the venue owners later that afternoon. The St. Clair Vineyard was threatening to sue for the unpaid balance of the reception. My father's check had bounced, obviously. The florist, the caterer, the band, they were all stiffed. "Pay them," I told Rachel. "Angela, you have no legal obligation," she warned. "This is your parents' debt." "I know," I said, signing the authorization on my tablet. "But I'm not them. Pay the vendors in full, direct from Vance Global's charity fund. Mark it as community relief. I want everyone in this town to know that while the Pattersons steal, I pay my debts." It was a power move, yes, but it was also the only way to sleep at night. I wasn't going to let the florist go under just because my father was a grifter. The hardest part wasn't the money, it was the meetings. I saw my mother on Wednesday. She wasn't in jail. Rachel had arranged for them to be released on bail pending the trial, but their passports were surrendered and their assets frozen. She was staying at a motel because the bank had already slapped a foreclosure notice on the house, accelerating the process due to the fraud investigation. I met her in the motel room. It smelled like stale cigarettes and lemon cleaner. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. The perfect mom mask was gone, leaving a tired, bitter woman. "Are you happy?" she asked, not looking at me. "You destroyed us. All of us." I told the truth, I said, standing near the door. I didn't want to sit. You destroyed yourselves the minute you signed my name to those papers. We did it for the family, she cried the old refrain. Tears welled up, but they didn't move me anymore. Ethan needed a start. We were going to pay it back eventually. We just needed time. You have so much, Angela. You have millions. Why couldn't you just share? Because you didn't ask, I said softly. You took, you stole, and you didn't do it for the family mom. You did it for Ethan. You cannibalized my future to feed his ego. You're my daughter, she whispered. You're supposed to help. I am helping, I said. I'm stopping you before you steal from anyone else. You never realized I had a future too. Did you? I was just a resource to you. She didn't answer. She just turned away, staring at the wall. There was no apology. There never would be. She truly believed she was the victim. I left the motel and drove to the house, my childhood home. Ethan was there packing boxes. The truck the Ford F-150 bought with my credit was gone, repossessed that morning. He was sitting on the tailgate of a U-Haul holding a football trophy. He looked 10 years older than he had on Saturday. He looked up as I approached. Sophie filed for annulment, he said. His voice was flat hollow. Cited fraud. I heard, I said. You really burned it all down, didn't you, Ang? He laughed, a dry, cracking sound. I have nothing. No job, Dad's company is seized. No truck. No wife. No house. You have a clean slate, I said. He looked at me with genuine anger. A clean slate? I'm 30 years old and I'm moving into a studio apartment above a garage. I'm a joke. You were a joke before, I told him brutally. You just didn't know it. You were living in a fantasy world Mom and Dad built for you. You were playing dress-up with my money. I walked closer to him. This hurts, Ethan. I know it does. But for the first time in your life, whatever you do next, it will be yours. If you get a job, it'll be yours. If you rent an apartment, it'll be yours. You don't have to be the golden child anymore. You can just be a person. I don't know how to do that, he admitted, his voice breaking. Then you better learn fast, I said, because the bank locks the gates at 5. I didn't hug him. I didn't offer him a loan. I didn't offer him a job at Vance Global. That would have been enabling him again. I turned and walked back to my car. As I drove away from the house, watching the rear-view mirror, I saw him stand up and toss the football trophy into the dumpster. It was a start. The fallout was messy. It was painful. It was ugly. But as I merged onto the highway heading back toward the city, I realized that the heavy weight I had been carrying on my chest since I was 19 was gone. The secret was out. The parasite was detached. I wasn't the Patterson daughter anymore. I was just me. And for the first time, that was enough. 1 year later, the smell of money is gone. I live in Seattle now, in a neighborhood that smells like rain-wet cedar and roasting coffee. My house isn't a mansion. It's a restored craftsman bungalow with a squeaky third step on the porch and a garden out back that I tend myself. There are no white ghost chairs, no imported orchids, and absolutely no staff polishing crystal. It's Saturday morning. I'm on my knees in the dirt pulling weeds from a bed of heirloom tomatoes. My hands are caked in soil, my fingernails are a disaster, and for the first time in my adult life, I am completely at peace. Inside the house, my phone is ringing, but I don't jump. I don't have that visceral spike of cortisol that used to hit me every time a screen lit up. I know who it is. It's Jasmine, who is coming over for brunch in an hour. I'm not hiding anymore. That's the biggest change. 6 months ago, I finally did the Forbes interview. I sat for the cover photo, no shadows, no JP. Vance pseudonym. Just Angela Vance, CEO of Vance Global. The article wasn't about the scandal, though they touched on it. It was about the logistics empire I built. When the magazine hit the stands, I waited for the panic to set in, the old fear that if I shone too bright, someone would come to harvest my light. But nothing happened. My parents couldn't call to demand a cut. Ethan couldn't use the article to leverage a loan. The silence was deafening, and it was beautiful. I finished with the weeds and went inside to wash up. My kitchen is messy, a chaotic mix of flour and eggs, because I'm trying to learn how to bake. This is the luxury I bought with my truth, the time to be bad at things. The time to learn who I am when I'm not being a safety net for 3 other adults. My chosen family has filled the vacuum left by the Pattersons. Jasmine, who started as my first employee, is now my COO and the sister I never had. We don't talk about obligation or sacrifice. We talk about ideas, art, and bad dates. There's a guy, David, an architect I met at a fundraiser. It's slow. It's quiet. He knows the story, and he doesn't treat me like a victim or a cash cow. He just treats me like Angela. I used the wreckage of the wedding to build something sturdy. Through Vance Global, I launched the Clean Slate Initiative. It's a nonprofit program designed to help young adults recover from familial financial abuse. We provide legal counsel to separate their credit from their parents' financial literacy courses and fraud monitoring. Every week, I read letters from kids 19, 20 years old who found out their parents opened utilities in their names or drained their college funds. They feel alone. They feel crazy. I write back to as many as I can. I tell them, "You are not a resource. You are a person." Using my pain to shield them makes the scars feel less like injuries and more like armor. But I won't lie and say the wound is completely closed. My biological family exists now as a series of legal updates in a folder on my lawyer's desk. I don't visit, I don't call, but I know where they are. My parents took a plea deal to avoid a lengthy federal trial that would have aired even more dirty laundry. They pleaded guilty to wire fraud and identity theft. Because of their age and lack of prior convictions, they avoided significant prison time. They got 5 years of probation restitution orders that will garnish their wages until they die, and a lifetime ban from managing financial assets. They lost the house, they lost the cars, they lost the country club membership, and the status that defined their existence. Last I heard, they are living in a rented duplex on the south side of town, the kind of place my father used to sneer at when we drove past. My dad works the counter at a hardware store. My mom greets customers at a discount superstore. They are living the blue-collar reality they spent 40 years running away from. The neighbors don't talk to them. The church they attended for decades asked them to leave after the scandal broke. Their punishment isn't a cell, it's the irrelevance. They wanted to be seen as royalty. Now they are pariahs. And Ethan. Ethan was the variable I wasn't sure about. I expected him to crash and burn. I expected him to end up in jail or addicted to something to numb the humiliation. But tragedy is a weird teacher. About 3 months ago, I got an email. No subject line, just a photo attached. It was a selfie of Ethan. He was wearing a neon yellow safety vest and a hard hat standing in front of a construction site. He looked tired. He looked sunburned. He looked thinner. The text underneath said, "Promoted to foreman today. It's not a corner office, but I built the wall behind me myself. Hope you're good, Ong." He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for a job. He didn't blame me. I didn't reply. We aren't there yet. We might never be there. But I didn't delete the email. I saved it to a folder labeled Progress. If he can learn to stand on his own 2 feet, maybe one day we can know each other as people, not as the prince and the servant. But that's on him. I'm done carrying him. I walked out onto my back porch with a cup of coffee. The sun was breaking through the Seattle gray. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. They ask if it was too harsh. It was a wedding, they say. You humiliated them. And I feel the guilt. It's a dull ache usually at night. I remember Sunday dinners. I remember my dad teaching me to ride a bike. I remember the version of them that existed before greed ate them alive. I mourn the parents I should have had, but then I remember the signature on the affidavit. I remember the mental incapacity claim. I remember that they looked me in the eye at the rehearsal dinner, hugged me and poured me wine, knowing they had just sold my life's work for pennies. If I hadn't burned it down, I would still be in the fire. I took a sip of coffee. The bitter warmth grounded me. That day in Napa wasn't a tragedy, it was an amputation. It was bloody and traumatic, and I lost a part of myself that I can never get back, the part that believed in unconditional love. But it saved the rest of me. I think back to that moment on the lawn, the smell of the lilies, the white chairs, the perfect facade. Everyone thought they were watching the beginning of Ethan's fairy tale. They didn't realize they were watching the end of mine, at least the end of the version of me who lived for their approval. My parents tried to sell my business to pay for a party. They thought they were cashing in a chip. They didn't realize the chip was me. I set the cup down on the railing and looked at my garden. The tomatoes were tied to stakes I had driven into the ground myself. The soil was rich, the roots were deep. They sold my past to pay for my brother's wedding. I used the truth to buy my freedom. And looking around at this quiet, messy, beautiful life, it was a bargain. Angela's journey from the overlooked daughter to the architect of her own freedom reminds us that sometimes you have to burn a bridge to keep the enemy from following you. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate justice and reclaiming your life, please hit that subscribe button. Let us know below, did she go too far, or was it exactly what they deserved? We read every single comment of your thoughts. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.